Well, welcome. It is good to see you all here. I'll be honest, this is a bigger crowd than I was anticipating on Super Bowl Sunday evening. Appreciate you coming out here. So, God has a unique way of answering prayers, because one of the prayers that Barb and I have been praying over this group is that God would help us to become more of a family together, to get to know each other. The early church, one thing that it demonstrated really well is the togetherness and the way that they bumped elbows and rubbed elbows together. And, we have a really unique strategy here, because now for the second week in a row, we have no men's bathroom, so all of us have to share one communal bathroom, which is really strange, but it's really definitely helping us talk to each other and plan ahead a little bit here. So, that's the way Jesus did it, right? So anyway, we have one restroom back there in that hallway. Great idea to knock tonight and talk a little bit before you go in there, and we'll work together and make that work. I am glad that you are here. We have concluded our first study that was in Acts. We studied the early church up to chapter 12 before the missionary journeys began, and at some point we'll probably jump back in and cover some of the missionary journeys, but right now, I'm still continuing to study the early church and the early disciple. What did Jesus have in mind when he called people to himself? And I have the idea that as I've been studying this is the idea of alignment. When something is just a little bit out of alignment, sometimes it's hard to notice. But if something is out of alignment for a long period of time, then you can start to notice how big of an impact that can have. So one thing that I've noticed here is our church today, as we understand it, as we talk about it, as we organize it, structure it, and then as we compare it to what the very early church was, it seems to be a little bit out of alignment. It's not the exact replica there, and I'm trying to go back to the beginning and not beat on the church today, but with the unique opportunity that we have to come in and say, God, I want to get it as close to your design as possible. Recognizing that 2,000 years is a long time for something to drift this way and that, and there's been some course corrections along the way, and it's always good to evaluate, to examine where we're at. And so we're going to be actually spending this month in February on the topic of the bride of Christ. So the bride of Christ is this picture that Jesus was now using to talk about the church that he envisioned, to talk about the church that he loved and cared for, died for, launched, birthed, has a lot of skin in the game for sure. When it comes to the design and what it is that this church is to accomplish. So before we get into the specific studies of the disciple part, I just want to talk about the church as the bride of Christ. So I brought my phone up here, which I almost never do, but I'm going to bring a little interaction here from Siri, okay? She's going to help me out, so just hold on for a moment. Hey, Siri. Define the church.
As a noun, it means a building used for public Christian worship. Do you want to hear the remaining one?
Yes.
This is an archaic term. As a verb, it means take a woman who has recently given birth to church for a service of thanksgiving.
Boy, Siri nailed it, didn't she? So did you hear that? It is a building where people meet. Now, Christians will often say, and I'm going to put this over here because this thing bugs me. I don't want it on me. Christians will often say, we know that the building isn't the church. We know that the church is the body of believers. But even though we can intellectually assent to that, we can say that, I still think we really struggle separating the idea of having a building place and an organization and the structure as we know it today, having a church outside of something like that. And yet, for the first few hundred years, Christians would have had no idea what you were talking about when you talked about a church building. They just met in their homes. That was the way that they did it. There was no church building. Now, there were times when the apostles would come together and they would teach thousands. They would use Solomon's colonnade for that, and they would use different places. There were places that Paul rented facilities and taught for years at a time when he was in Ephesus. But typically, what would happen is the church, which they would have understood as the people. They would have had no other idea in their minds. When you said the church, they would have been thinking the people gathering together. They would go into their homes. In fact, pay attention when you begin to read about, when you're reading the letters of Paul, and he'll talk about greet the people the church that meets at Mark's mother's house. Meet the church that meets at so-and-so's house. It's always someone meeting at their houses. Now, the advantage to that is that super, super rapid growth that they experienced at the beginning of Christianity and the early church, it took no building programs to be able to keep up with that kind of growth. It took no budget whatsoever. They had very, very little overhead. They were very movable. In fact, when they had the explosive growth in Jerusalem and persecution moved in, well, half the church just moved out to Antioch and all different places, and the church was just spreading all over the place. And certainly, the more that Satan tried to stop the church, the more it spread. It's like putting out a grease fire. You can't dump water on it. It just gets worse. And everything Satan was trying to do to stop the spread of the church was just making it spread faster. And he couldn't stop it. It's a fascinating study what happened. It was interesting. When I was in seminary, I was taught about all the good that came finally when Constantine came onto the picture. Constantine was the Roman emperor who finally was not like Nero, and he wasn't like Domitian and some of these ruthless, brutal emperors that went before that just were so hard on the Christians, terrible torture and things like that. Though that was just in specific moments and places in time. I don't know that the entire church was experiencing that, but they were certainly under heavy persecution. But then Constantine comes along, and he favors what he sees in Christian. I don't know if he was saved or not. There's a big debate about that, and that's really not where I'm going here tonight. But what he did do is he wanted to please the God of Christianity. So he ends up making that a state religion, and everything flipped on its head. Now all the beautiful temples and religious meeting places are now being redesigned and reformed into churches for Christians to meet in. And rather than scattering, they're coming together. And rather than having no political influence, they're rising to power with tremendous political influence. Instead of having no budget, they're being given money from the state, and everything flips on its head. Now they have buildings, and they have power, and they have influence, and they have structure, and they have all these things. And I'm sure at first it felt like an incredible blessing. However, that course corrected, that put the church on a trajectory that was very different from its origin. And it's still, we carry a lot of what happened to the church into our culture today, erecting the buildings and giving it a lot of the forms that we do. And again, we've had the Reformation, and we've had things that where we've recognized things are very, very wrong. But I'm not so sure that everything Constantine did there was a huge blessing to the church. And it's just fascinating to go back and to see how simple it once was when it was so powerful, so effective, and spreading so quickly. So I've really been enjoying this study and continuing to pray, God, in this opportunity, I just want the church to be everything it can possibly be. So please guide the steps as we continue here, and let us go slowly and figure this out and align ourselves, kind of giving ourselves a realignment to the best of our ability with what we see in Scripture. Jesus, of course, you've heard use the word ecclesia, which when they used the word ecclesia, it simply meant an assembly or a gathering. In fact, you may know the denomination, the Assemblies of God. Well, that's a great name because that's what a perfect definition or a translation of the ecclesia is, just the assembly of the people of God. And whenever he used that, he was talking about an assembly of followers that were loyal to him and had pledged their allegiance and their lives to him and were essentially willing to die and live their lives for him. That's what Jesus meant as the church. So as we talk about the church, I want to talk now about becoming the bride of Christ and some of the imagery that he uses here, and making sure that we are preparing ourselves to be a group of people that are prepared when the groom comes. And I'm afraid if we're not careful and the church continues to kind of wander down and struggle with consumerism and kind of an inward focus and some of the things that we can quickly get caught up in. You ever heard of that television show Bridezilla? I don't know if you've heard about it, but I think the name is pretty self-explanatory. We don't want Jesus coming back for the Bridezilla. Just a mess of what happened, what was supposed to be is not getting there. We want to make sure that we are aligning well with what the bride of Christ is supposed to be. So let me take you first through a little bit of review. Jesus has a design for his bride. It's supposed to look a certain way. And we just spent a whole bunch of weeks studying from Acts 1 to chapter 12. And I wanted to bring you back just a little bit of review. If you remember, many of you weren't here, but in our very first launch in chapter 1, we talked about a kingdom defector. The call to Christianity was literally to defect from your kingdom. You no longer belonged to this world, to the kingdom that you belonged in, but you were defecting into the kingdom of God. And we talked about the importance of God's people living by the Spirit and living with purpose and having these types of things in their lives, living as a witness, understanding our place before God. And then in Acts 2, we began to study the importance of being together, united, being known for our love. This church, as we read through the book of Acts, they didn't seek out comfort. They understood they were going to suffer, but they suffered together. And they came together for encouragement, but they were willing to suffer and suffer incredibly for the kingdom of God. So they had that mindset that they were, especially with the martyr of Stephen, and we read about the martyr of James, and we're starting to get that heavy persecution. The religious leaders of Judaism were coming down hard on them. Rome was trying to push this out. They didn't want all the commotion. They understood there was going to be a price to pay, so they forsook everything and defected from their kingdoms to become part of the kingdom of God. The reason we started there was because in our culture, Christianity can be something where we strengthen our kingdom, build our kingdom. We almost have the anticipation, God, if you're coming into my life, I hope things are going to get a little bit better. Things can start to run a little bit smoother. You can bless my marriage, bless my family, bless my finances, bless my job. And we look for the blessings and all the blessings. And I hope we find rich blessings in knowing God. But we know we're communicating wrong somewhere when many Christians become extremely frustrated and sometimes even leave the faith when the suffering begins. And they start to ask, the questions and demand to know from God, why won't you intervene? Why does it have to be this way? Why did this bad thing happen to this good person? And it's almost like we've missed the call to suffering, where Jesus has told his church, I experienced suffering. The world hated me. They're also going to hate you. Expect this to happen. This world is hard, but it's temporary. All this will only last so long. So this was the expectation of the early church. And I brought with me the Message. Don't quote from this a whole lot, but I ran across a verse in Ephesians chapter 1, and it was a summary from Eugene Peterson. He kind of paraphrases the Bible, and I loved how he paraphrased Ephesians chapter 1. And the very last verse here, I think it was verse 31. And he says this in summary: the church is Christ's body, in which he speaks and acts, by which he fills everything with his presence. Now that's a better definition, I think, than what Siri gave us. They wouldn't have described themselves by their buildings. They wouldn't have described themselves by their denominations. But they would have been known for their unity. They would have been known for their passion for the cause of Christ. They would have been united in their mission in the gospel, and they were known for their love for one another. So those are the things that I still want to capitalize on in the church today. My primary passage, which I'm not going to spend a ton of time on tonight, but it's in John, the book of John chapter 2, and it's this passage where Jesus demonstrates this overflow of passion when it comes to how God's people express their worship to him. It's the cleansing of the temple. So let me read from John chapter 2, starting in verse 13. You can just listen if you like. It says, "It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. So Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle and scattered the money changers' coins all over the floor. And he turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, 'Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace.' Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the Scriptures. 'Passion for God's house will consume me.'" Passion for God's house will consume me. One of the marks of Jesus is that he is passionate about the worship and the house of God. And through this series, we're going to actually talk about the journey. The house of God has changed over time. From the Old Testament, we had the tabernacle, and then it came to the temple, and then in Jesus' ministry, he talked about, in 3 days you'll take this temple down, but I will raise it up again. So then he's talking about his body, and then ultimately in the New Testament, the temple becomes the people of God, the church. So there's a journey there, and we want to make sure we get this right. But I want you to notice that Jesus is passionate about God's house, about worship. So even in the Old Testament, there's some shocking things that God says through the prophets. Malachi chapter 1, verse 10, some similar things were happening. Worship was becoming more ritualistic. People's hearts were not engaged with God, and the sacrificial system was starting to break down in its purpose. It was becoming meaningless to the people, and God said to the priests, "Oh, that someone would shut the temple doors so that these useless sacrifices would not continue." He was sick of them being on the altar. Now, for a good church-going person today, we would think that the last thing you would ever want to do, because you would offend God greatly, would be to shut the church doors. But there can be cases where we get so out of alignment with what God's purpose and plan is that he would rather the doors shut than it to continue. That he would rather just stop the whole thing because he can't bear to see what's going on. And he got to that place in the Old Testament on multiple occasions. So we want to get worship right. And again, we're going to take this journey where it goes from the tabernacle to the temple to Christ and ultimately to the church, which is his body. The people of God are living stones that build up the house of God now, which really changes the dynamic. Romans chapter 12 talks about now we are expressions of worship. Our life is worship to God, because now that's how worship is taking place, through the lives of his people. But here in this scene, Jesus was so angry because the church had become more about power and profit than it had to do with the presence of God. They had taken what was supposed to be all about God and made it all about themselves. And let me explain to you just a little bit of what was taking place here in John chapter 2 that made him so angry. The priests, it's in verse 14, I think, they would do two things. They had the cattle, the sheep, the doves for sacrifices, and then Jesus saw the dealers at the tables exchanging foreign money. And then he got really, really angry at what he saw. So let me tell you about the dynamics that were taking place here. When we're talking about the temple courts, remember I said this a few weeks ago, Gentiles cannot ever go into the temple. So they could go into the temple courts to pray. But look what else was happening in the temple courts. They had the money changers' tables, and they were selling cattle of all different kinds that had been prepped for sacrifices. Now that's because all these people would come in to make sacrifices to God, and you had to have an animal that was unblemished. Well, who do you think made the call, the final call, of whether the animal was good enough to be sacrificed or not? It was the priests. It was the priests. So people would bring the best that they had to offer to God. But as they brought it into the temple area, the priests would take a look at that and say, I think I see a blemish. Fortunately for you, we have some cattle for sale right over there. And the prices had gone up incredibly. So there was a bit of a cash cow here. There was a money-making scheme that the priests just couldn't help themselves, but it had become the custom. So you have all the buying and the selling of these cattle in different forms, depending on what kind of money that they had. And that's over top of the Gentile prayer area, so I can't imagine how distracting that was. Not only that, they had tables for exchanging money. So you were supposed to give your contribution of half a shekel as the temple tax when you came there. Well, to do that, the half a shekel was a very specific Jewish coin, which at this point in history was kind of going out of date. They didn't really use it anywhere, so that was no problem. They had lots of half a shekels that they were willing to exchange for you for quite a fee. So again, you can see where those who were supposed to be, the priests who were supposed to be facilitating worship and helping the people who were coming to the temple to worship God, the priest's point was there to help connect the hearts of people to the heart of God. They had now gotten so entrenched in this money-making system that they were just making a killing off of all of this. And their focus was in the wrong place. And Jesus saw this, and he was just so angry that he went into throwing that fit where he was literally, can you imagine the scene? Can you imagine how uncomfortable you all would get if I just walked to one of these tables and flipped the thing and all the stuff goes fine? It'd get real awkward and real quick in here. So you can imagine, and I didn't even fashion a whip out of anything in that illustration. So you can imagine when Jesus is doing this, that the priests are like, is this guy a maniac? This is just outrageous, and yet we're seeing a glimpse of the heart of God. The poor disciples are probably just like, Jesus, you tone her down just a little bit here. But he's just irate. We're getting a glimpse, and after all of this, we get this glimpse of the heart of God. The disciples, it comes to their mind, remember the prophecy in the Old Testament that said that the Messiah would be passionate about God's house. So they're putting the puzzle pieces together and slowly forming who Jesus is. So we need to get this right, because we see that we as a people can get to the place where we're so out of alignment that we actually grieve the heart of God. Now again, I'm talking to you a little bit about the journey that I'm on, but I also want to bring this to where you're at, because the Bible talks a lot about the bride of Christ, and that refers to church corporate, but you are part of that. You fit into that picture. And again, we talk a lot here about, I want my life to count. You guys want your life to count. We understand that one day we will stand before Christ and give an account of our lives, how we lived it. But I am absolutely certain that the way that we give an account over our lives, you have verses like Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, which says that before the foundation of the earth, God ordained the things that we were called to accomplish good works for Him. Like God has a plan for our lives. We say that a lot, but He really does. He has a plan and a purpose for our lives. And I think we're going to be judged when the books are opened. I think it's the idea that when our name comes up, there were things written down before the world was even created that God had in mind. I am calling you to walk in this way and to accomplish this. There is a path and a purpose that I have for you. So I don't want you to think that Judgment Day is just going to be, okay, well, what are the good things that you did, and what are the bad things? All right, bad things are covered by the blood. That's gone. Now let's just see what kind of good stuff you did. I think it's more than that. I think the day that we give an account of our lives, The books will be opened, and God will stand before me and say, John Green, I created you with purpose, and I redeemed you at great price to walk this way, to accomplish these things. These are the things that were written from the foundation of the world. It is time for you to give an account of the life that was given to you. That's specific. And I don't want us, the Bible talks about being able to give an account of our lives with joy. And it also talks about the tragedy of many who give an account of their lives and the whole thing's burned away. Everything. And it talks a lot about people who go to give an account of their lives and they find that their name is not even in the book of the Lamb's Book of Life. Terrifying. Horrifying. The point being, we can miss this. We can get off course ourselves. So we want to make sure that we are living in such a way that we are aligning ourselves well. It's not just about a church. It's about people, individuals. We are the church aligning to God's expectations. So I have a bit of a project here for us. I'm going to turn to the book of Revelation, chapter 2 and chapter 3. Now, this happens just a few decades after the birth of the church. So we have Jesus' earthly ministry, somewhere around 30 AD in that time frame, and he gives these teachings. This is what my disciple will look like. And this is what my church is called to do. Then we have the death and resurrection of Jesus, the Great Commission. And in the Great Commission, we are to take those teachings and to teach them to those who are following after Christ, to baptize them, and we're to start this process of making disciples. So a few decades in, Jesus checks in to give them a course correction and records it for all of us to see so that we can see whether we're lining up with this correctly or not. So we're going to do a little bit of a project here tonight. So each of your tables has a number on it. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have each table turn, if you have a Bible at your table, I want you to turn to Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 3. And at your tables, I want you to look, I'm going to give you one church, and I want you to look for two simple things. Number one, what did the church do that Jesus liked? And number two, what did the church do that Jesus despised? Now, not every church has both of those, but simply put, now you don't have to be a Bible scholar to do that. If there's verses in there and you're like, what are the Nicolaitans? What's that all about? It doesn't matter. All right, go for big picture here, okay? Jesus knew that we probably weren't going to be real familiar with the doctrine of the Nicolaitans 2,000 years away. That's okay. Look for big picture. Go ahead and advance that slide for me, Matt, so that we have that up there. One more. Someone has been very derelict in their duties for advancing slides. One more. One more. There we go. So let's go through the name of the church, and then we're going to answer these two questions at your table. So here's instruction number one. Before you get going too far, if you don't know the names of the people that are sitting at your table, go ahead and introduce yourselves. Pete, could I have you just slide over to this table? Because that way you'll have a little bit more discussion there. So let's see here. Let's do this. So table number one, I'm going to give you Ephesus. That's Revelation 2, 1 through 7. You guys got that? So you guys can read that and look for those two questions. What did Jesus love about this church, and what did he detest about this church? So table number 2 will give you Smyrna. That's Revelation 2, 8 through 11. We'll jump over, what's this, table number 4? So we'll give you Pergamum. That is Revelation 2, 12 through 17. All right. Table, let's see, where are we? Are you guys number 5? Number 5. We'll give you Thyatira. So that's Revelation 2, 18. Oh, you guys got like a really big one through 29. You guys got this? You got this. Thyatira. Starts in 2:18. You did we skip Philadelphia? No.
It's the sixth church, I think, isn't
That's all right. That's okay, because we have a recruitment up there. We're going to get them. Sardis. You guys will be number 6. We'll have Sardis. And Revelation 3. Philadelphia. You don't like Philly? Well, you can do Laodicea, but that might be a bad decision.
Wait, we like Philadelphia.
All right. Philadelphia. All right. You guys will take Philadelphia. That leaves you guys up there with Laodicea. Laodicea. So take about 5 minutes. Make sure you know the names of the people at your table. Read through your passage and answer those 2 questions. What did Jesus love about this church? And what did Jesus detest about this church? All right. So this is important because what we're going to do is we're going to build 2 churches. We're going to build a good church, and we're going to build a bad church, a detestable church. So we have our crew over here at the sound booth. They're going to be taking your answers and putting them into 2 columns. If Jesus said there was something he loved about the church, we're putting that in the good column. And if he said there was something that he detested, we're putting that in the bad one. And we're going to see the design of a church that God's heart loves and delights in, and the design of the church that really upsets God and gets him angry, really missing the mark. Okay? So as you figured out, not everybody has both things. Some churches had only positive. That's a great thing. That's what I would want. Some churches had only negative, not a good thing. Most churches had both. So let's start over here with table number 1. Do we have someone who can speak for us? All right, Donna. So Donna, what was the name of your church? Ephesus. And in just as few words as possible, what did Jesus love about Ephesus? Hard work and perseverance. Yeah, I highlighted patient endurance. Yes, so we can put some of the mixture right in there. Patient endurance, hard work. And what did you see that he did not like?
They had forsaken their first love.
They have forsaken their first love. Yes. I underlined in mine, you don't love me or each other. I have that highlighted. So they have lost their love. They're enduring, but he likes that, but he does not like that they've lost their love. Very good. Very good. Thank you, Ephesus, table number 1. Table number 2, you guys had Smyrna. Do we have someone talking over here? Kelly, you look so excited to talk about this. So, they were faithful in spite of being poor. Yes, very good. I had highlighted, you will suffer, but remain faithful. So they're faithful in their suffering, absolutely. What didn't Jesus like about Smyrna? They were liars and slanderers. Now, where did you find that? Because they may have actually been battling that. What verse? In verse 9.
I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not.
Yes, the blasphemy of those who oppose you in that same verse. So that's actually coming those who are lying against the church. So we won't count that against them. But he is actually rewarding them for they are faithfully suffering against that as that's coming down, that form of persecution. So faithful in suffering. Are you all right, Tricia? You hanging with us so far? Very good. Great job, Smyrna. So we're coming over here to Pergamum.
I'm glad you pronounced that for me.
Pergamum. There we go.
Okay, they were true to Jesus and didn't renounce their faith, even though Antipas was put to death.
Okay.
That was their good.
So they were loyal in persecution, we could say. Very good.
And they had enticed the Israelites to sin and ate the sacrificial food, and they had sexual immorality.
Okay. So what I had narrowed that down to is that they were embracing cultural sin, because those forms of sexual immorality what's all around them. So God did not like about this church the embracing of cultural sin around them, but he did like that they were loyal in persecution. Very good, guys. Did you get that? All right. We're doing well. Thyatira. Who am I talking to over here anyway? Janelle? All right, Janelle, tell us about Thyatira.
Well, what they did that was good was they had works such as love, service, faith, and patience, but they had Jezebel, who was a false prophetess. That's what it says here, prophetess.
Yes?
And she committed sexual immorality, and ate things sacrificed to idols.
Okay. Very good. That's what it says. So they were growing disciples because they had all those things. They were growing in their love and their faith and their service and in their patient endurance. So they're growing disciples. Jesus likes that. However, they have this prophetess, Jezebel, and we don't know exactly what all that means, but we know that they were permitting immoral teachings there. So the teaching was not good, immoral teachings. So we would say, thumbs up to the growing disciples, thumbs down to bad teaching. Let's come over to Sardis. All right, we've got Jeff, right? Jeff, talk to me about Sardis.
Well, what he liked about Sardis was there was a faithful remnant there.
A faithful remnant. Yes, a few faithful, it says. I like that. So he's praising the faith, encouraging the faithful remnant. Among, what was his words? The dead. A faithful remnant from a dead.
Dan reminded us of the parable of the sower, that the seed fell along the rocky ground and sprang up because he did acknowledge they had a reputation for being alive, but maybe the cares of the world caused them to fall away.
Yeah, excellent. So for our record keeping here, he's happy about the faithful few, but he is telling that church, you're dead. You're a dead church. The community may think that you're alive, but I see the hearts of the people, you're dead. Yikes, that's a harsh word against Sardis. But hang in there to the faithful few that are among them. An encouraging word. Thank you. Sardis, Philadelphia. They first didn't want Philadelphia, but then they changed their tune when they thought they were going to get Laodicea, so they gave that to the kids instead. So what did you find on Philadelphia, Rich?
Perseverance in the faith.
Perseverance in the faith, very good.
Keeps the word of Christ and honors his name.
Keeps the word of Christ, honors his name. You have little strength, yet you obeyed. Little strength, yet you obeyed. So seemingly insignificant, but certainly obedient. Very good. Nothing bad. Nothing bad. That's what Tom.
I won't be in a group where there's any bad.
Not a bad seed at this table. Yeah, all good against Philadelphia. He had nothing bad to say about them. So did we get a spokesperson? All right, my eldest, Sadie. What have you guys found out about Laodicea? Yes. Very, very good, kiddos. So yeah, they were indifferent, which the word picture there is... They call her lukewarm. They call them lukewarm. So God didn't like the indifference in the people. And even though these people, from the world's perspective, were very rich, they had everything they could possibly want, Jesus says, you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. Probably the strongest language against any church that we've seen in here. In fact, I tremble to think if that could possibly even be describing believers, because I never hear Jesus describing believers in the New Testament that way. You are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. If that's his bride, he's got to work on his sweet talk a little bit. He's really coming down hard on these people. What you think you're doing, you think you're pleasing me, it's not pleasing me. So we've built 2 churches here. Jesus has given them a little bit of feedback. Remember, these churches are young. So they've all come out of the area of Jerusalem and Antioch, and now Jesus is giving some reports. And these are open letters for all to read. We're still reading them. And Jesus wants us to know what makes him happy as his people come together and worship, and what does not. So, Tricia, can you help us out here? Tell us? Okay, you wrote it down. You're cheating here. Tell us what the good church sounds like.
The good church had hard work and perseverance, patient endurance, faithful in spite of being poor, faithful in suffering, true to Jesus and didn't renounce faith, loyal in persecution, growing disciples, love, faith, patient endurance, faithful remnant, hang in there, perseverance in the faith, keeps word of Christ and honors his name.
Okay, so after hearing all of that, let's boil it down. What are some of the reoccurring themes that you're seeing in there? Faithful. Enduring through persecution and suffering.
Staying true, working hard for Jesus.
Yeah, obedient. And I heard you comment several times on even though they're small, even though they're poor. So I would hear Jesus commending mostly these little, poor, small, insignificant churches who are persevering through suffering, who are being faithful, and who are growing in their faith. That's a picture of what Jesus, and I don't think the size of the church there is what he's focusing on, but these are some of the things he is seeing. I'm seeing these churches here, and these are the attributes that please me. Faithful in the midst of suffering, growing, persevering. Very good. Making disciples, yes. Now, what about the other side?
Forsaken first love, don't love God or each other, embracing cultural sin, prophetess Jezebel, immoral teachings, you're dead, lukewarm, poor, blind, wretched, naked, indifferent.
Okay. So we have indifference. These people would seem more significant to the world around them than some of the other churches that Jesus was more impressed with and thought were more significant. Go through that one more time.
Forsaken first love,
Okay, so they're not loving well.
don't love God or each other, embracing cultural sin,
Okay, so cultural sin is contaminating the church. Mm-hmm.
like with the prophetess Jezebel, immoral teachings, just dead in general, lukewarm, poor, blind, wretched, naked.
In that indifference, yeah, the indifference. Okay, so as we hear those, I want you to start to take a look inside here, because the church is not the bricks and the mortar. The church is God's people. God is looking for people. He doesn't care whether they are significant or not, whether the world around them is impressed with them or not. He doesn't care whether they're influential or not. However, he's looking for people who are persevering in the midst of their suffering, who continue to hold on to their faith in the hard times, who don't feel insignificant even though the world may have labeled them insignificant, because they know their place as they're following after him. He is pleased when we are growing in our faith and growing in our love, growing in our obedience. We're growing in the act of becoming a disciple. He's very pleased with that. And I think overall he's very, very pleased when his people love him and love one another effectively, genuinely. That's the church that is in alignment with the heart of God. And the church that is completely out of alignment, that Jesus has very harsh words for, is just this indifference. We've learned to take care of ourselves. We've got this, we care what the world thinks as they look in on us. And that's how a lot of immorality slides into the church. A lot of times there's just the cultural sins are not addressed, and because they don't want to become unpopular. So we have this contaminated church that has lost its love for people and lost its love for God. And Jesus has really, really harsh words. Even though there are people with much, he's not impressed. So the first thing we want to do is say, God, where am I on that spectrum? And we're probably not all one way or the other, because the churches he spoke to were mixed. Hey, you're doing this well, but man, this has got to get fixed. And most of us are probably in that place as we're looking down through this list. I'm lining up here. I think I maybe have some green checks, some thumbs up coming towards me, but yeah, I also know there's some struggle going on over here. So we're just trying to make sure that we align ourselves, because one day Jesus is coming for his bride, and we want to make sure that we are ready. And we have to be ready individually if we're going to be ready as the church corporate. And again, as I'm closing here, but I want you to pray as we continue forward. It's easy to see that churches very quickly can become far out of alignment with what pleases God. So we want to make sure that we are in perfect alignment and pleasing to the Lord, and becoming a people that makes the heart of Christ smile. There was a couple churches mentioned. Jesus had nothing but good to say. I mean, when we stand before him on that day that we give an account of our lives, I pray that we'll hear, each of us in this room, lots of good. Lots of good. But my heart nearly stops when I think of those places where Jesus is going to look at people and say, you thought you were rich, you thought you had it all, but when I look at you, you are poor, blind, pitiable, naked, wretched. Depart from me, you who have embraced iniquity over a passion for your Savior. We want to make sure that we're falling into a pattern in our lives that brings about the pleasure of God. We're going to close tonight. We're going to be actually introducing a new song. I'll invite our musicians up. And Barb, I think you're going to share even a little bit from a parable about the bride of Christ. So we're just going to kind of finish on that note, and then we'll sing a song that's going to be a theme song for us this month.
So the song that we're going to sing is Even So Come, and it's not, like some of you may actually know it, hopefully you do, and you can sing along. You will by the end of this month. We have chosen this to sing all month because it's so appropriate for the teachings that we're going through. And it's all about Jesus is coming back one day for his bride. And just to really personalize that, we just wanted to speak about this song a little bit. We are the bride of Christ, and that means every single person. If you have professed faith in Jesus, you are his bride, men or women. And he's coming back for us one day. So this song is all about that. So when Jesus is speaking in parables to the people in their time, he's referencing Jewish customs, that they would really understand these words that he's saying. So he's talking about the groom and the bride as Jesus is the groom. So what he says is he's letting them know that the groom is coming back one day for each of us. So the groom goes to the bride's home and speaks to the bride's father, and he pays a bride price for this bride. And that signifies Christ, as we were bought with a price. They make an agreement. They actually do some kind of a contract. And then they're betrothed. So this young couple is now betrothed. They are pledged to each other. So the marriage ceremony hasn't happened yet. It will. But as they're betrothed, they are pledged to each other. They are considered married. She now belongs to him. She is pledged to him. It's just like us. When we accept Christ, we are now pledged and betrothed to him. We are his bride. So the groom then says to the bride and her family, I'm going to go back to my father's house and prepare a place for you, and then I will come back for you, my bride. Very same words Jesus used when he was talking to his disciples. He said, I'm going to go to heaven. I'm going to go to my Father's house, and I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm coming back for you one day. And he wanted us to be ready for that. They also say in these parables that the Father is the only one that knows the time when the Son will come. So these Jewish people would know when the bridegroom left to go prepare basically they called it a honeymoon room in his father's house. That is where they would actually live. It wasn't until that room was finished and the father approved it that he was able to go and get his bride. And so, as Jesus said, only the Father knows when I will come. I do not know. Only the Father knows. It's all the same. It's just a beautiful picture, and that is for us. That's for you and me. One day, he's coming back for us. And we want to be ready. Because one glorious day, he is going to come. The Father is going to say, your place is ready. Your room is ready. Go and get your bride and bring her home. Praise God, and that is for us as well. If you want to stand and join us, we're going to sing here in just a moment. We are just encouraged to be faithful and be ready, waiting with anticipation for the glorious day when we're reunited with Jesus Christ. I hope this song ministers to you as it did us.